In this teaching, we're going to be talking about pulling lists, specifically what lists I have had the most success using on finding properties, and lists I think you should attempt depending on what type of property you are trying to buy. Now, I'm going to talk about it here. I'm going to talk about it quickly here, but I'm also going to give you screen video shots of me actually going through so you can actually see what I mean on the websites and how to select property. Again, I'm heavily focused on multifamily, so a lot of my expertise comes in multifamily selections when I'm picking my property characteristics. Now, we're going to go through a little bit of what I believe is necessity for these. So if you're looking for multifamily or you're looking for single family or commercial properties, no matter what you're looking for, you really want to make sure that the type of property that you're targeting, you want it to be owner occupied or non-owner occupied, right? Now, so if you were trying to purchase a property, what would you think would be easier to buy? Something where the person is occupying it or something where the person who owns it is not occupying, right? So 99% of the time I select non-owner occupied for all of the lists that I send. The second thing I look for is, okay, so how much equity do these properties actually have in them? And so the idea behind that is that higher equity owners, if you can get a list of those, they likely will be more apt to sell than a lower equity play because they may be able to take a discount without actually having a loan be worth more than the actual offer you can make on the property. And so, for example, I would purchase a non-owner occupied list with a 30% equity play. And so what that will do is it will siphon out an entire list of properties in whatever location I decide to pick with non-owner occupies, meaning that they don't have a mailing address of the property I'm looking to send a letter to, and they also have equity greater than 30% of what the estimated value is on that website. Now, it's not always super accurate, but the likelihood that these websites are accurate is supposed to be in the 90%. And so you will see as you go through these that some of them are not accurate. But for the most part, that is a good generalized list that will give you a good amount of property. The next piece I really like to include is first of all, making sure it's not on the MLS, right? And so on all these websites, you can check, MLS listed or not. You want to select no, right? Because then everybody else can see it. However, we will talk about another strategy later on with direct mail where you actually use MLS properties to send direct mail to those owners to pick up different leads and better deals on other stuff, right? And so what we're going to talk about next is out-of-state owners. Now, out-of-state owners have a higher likelihood of neglect on their property, especially if it's a smaller property, single family, duplex, triplex, condo, a quad, maybe a 5 or 6 unit, right? When you get up into the 50, 100, 150 unit properties, typically those are not owned by your mom and pops. They're typically LLCs, and so if you might have a lot of out-of-state owners for that, but more specifically for the smaller multifamily and the residential class properties, this is actually a great way to weed things out by finding properties where the owner may live in North Carolina, but the property's in Massachusetts. Maybe that this property has overgrown grass or shingles falling off of it, right? You can go up and look on these websites and see if they're out of state, right? And so that's sort of the idea behind it. But when you pull this list, the out of state is huge. It gives you a leg up. They may not be able to show the property to you immediately, but likely they have a manager in place. And if they don't have a manager in place, that's even a better opportunity for you to come in and scoop up an opportunity. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is occupancy status, meaning is it occupied, is it vacant? And so this is very simple. It's usually just, is it occupied or vacant, right? And so I actually don't select this box that often unless I'm looking for land. And we'll get into that later when we talk specifically about, land, marketing to land. So a lot of these websites will have, property type, right? So what type of property do you want? Is it a single family duplex? Is it a small multi, a large multi? So what you're going to do is you're going to select which one you want. However, the accuracy on here is really, especially for PropStream and ListSource actually, if you select large multi, you're going to notice that you're going to have a lot of properties with that are 4 units in there and 3 units, sometimes duplexes. And I always wondered, why is it so inaccurate? and I couldn't come to a conclusion. However, I fixed the solution for most of them. And so what you're going to do is you're going to say, let's say we want large multifamily, 5 or more. I'm going to go in and I'm going to select, I want 5 or more properties. I'm then going to go over to the bathroom count and I'm going to put a minimum of 5. Now what this does is it not only takes me for 5 units and larger, it also makes sure that the property that sits in that 5 units and larger also has 5 bathrooms. So now I know for sure, 99% sure, that those 5 units are actually 5 separate units. Now granted, you could have a property that has 2 bathrooms in 1 unit, and fortunately where I live up in the Northeast, a lot of the multifamily property are older property, and so that actually doesn't exist that often. So this is just another way to improve the accuracy of the list that you actually are getting. Another thing you can do is go to the bedroom selection and hit 5, at minimum 5 as well. Now this is really reinforcing that, okay, I want 5 or more units. I've got minimum of 5 bedrooms, meaning that they're all going to be 1 bedroom units or greater, and I've also got 5 bathrooms in there, so it's going to guarantee me that I'm gonna have 5 separate units. Now, the other time this may not come into play is if it's commercial property and you have a 5-unit mixed-use building, right? Because that mixed-use building may not have a bathroom or a bedroom in it, in that 1 unit, and so that can skew the results as well. However, this is why we plug and play with direct mail and we improve as we go. Really the purpose of this section of the course is to kind of give you some nuances and tricks to really improve the accuracy of the list that you're actually pulling. So you're actually sending mail to the correct places instead of having mail get sent to properties you do not want them sent to. So another really important one is year built. Now, I'm going to take you through each of the type of properties that I try to reach out to and where year built actually comes into play. If I'm trying to buy a large multifamily property, I want to make sure that the year built is not before 1960, 1970 range. And the reason for that is because a 40-unit apartment building, if the entire thing has lead paint, it's got entirely old plumbing, that is really the time zone when those things started to change over to non-lead paint. And a better upgrade in plumbing, etc., etc. And so for me, if I'm looking for large multifamily property, I want to make sure, unless it's a really great deal, I want to make sure that it's been built after 1960, 1970 timeframe. For flips, on the other hand, I also want to make sure it's 1960, 1970 because knob and tube, lead painting, asbestos shingles, right? There's a bunch of reasons why, but really 1960, 1970 for flips as well. Now, most of the time condos are built way earlier, 80s, 90s, 2000s. And so if I'm looking for a flip in that arena, I'm not necessarily too worried about the actual year built on those. In fact, I don't even select a year built on those because 99% of them were built earlier, later in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Retail and other commercial property doesn't necessarily play a huge role in the year that it was actually built because of a lot of the times the deals that I'm trying to get, if it's retail or commercial, they're usually triple net leasing, meaning the tenant is taking care of all of the maintenance, delayed maintenance, capital expenditure, the taxes, right? And so as a landlord in that case, I'm not too worried about the year built when it comes to commercial, retail, or industrial buildings. And obviously for land, if you put in a year built for land, it's going to really screw up your results because sometimes they have land with a year built in there. And let's think about that for a minute. That makes absolutely no sense, right? So make sure you do not select year built when you're doing a land list. Okay, and perhaps the most important part is ownership info, right? So who are you going to be sending these to? Are you going to be sending it to individual owners? Are you going to be sending it to corporations, LLCs, trusts? Who are you going to be sending these to? And yes, you can weed them out. And so for me, I have found the most success when it comes to, maybe 10, 15 unit apartment buildings down to condos and everything in between. Aside from large multifamily property like 50 and 100 units, the highest chance I have of finding a deal where I can lock it up and get it under agreement at below market value with a value add play is that mom and pop owner. And so what you want to do is go into the ownership section and hit individual or non-LLC, non-corporation. Basically what you want is the person who owns the property in their personal name. Now, and I know that if you go try to buy a 10-unit property right now, unless you're buying it in cash, most banks want you to have it in an LLC. And so this is also going to tell you that, okay, if an owner owns a 10-unit property, or an 8-unit or a 6-unit or something like that in their personal name, they've likely owned this for quite some time. They don't have it in an LLC. They're likely a mom and pop owner. The likelihood that the management on that is top notch, unless they are pristine at it, which most of the time they are not, because they are not professional managers. There's a lot of value add play there, right? There's usually a lot of deferred maintenance that's there. The rents are usually super low, but that is your time as a value add investor to come in and scoop that lead up and try to work in magic and get it under agreement and ultimately go through with whatever your plan is. And I'm going to add one more important thing in here, and that's the last sale date. So this is going to vary depending on which property you're trying to buy, but honestly, 5 years and less, if someone's owned a property for 5 years and less, I really try not to target the bulk of my mailings to people in that area. I like 5 years and longer, again, because somebody has held the property longer, they've built up equity in the property, they may have a higher likelihood of selling due to that, that time that they've allowed the real estate to appreciate. Not only that, with that equity, they've now paid down their loan balance, and maybe they don't have a mortgage anymore, or maybe they've, whatever it is, the value of the property is going up, and their mortgage is dropping, so they have a larger spread. And not only that, but in that same instance, they may actually be interested in doing seller financing. They may be interested in doing seller credits, right? Because they have that flexibility. And lastly, on top of that, if you just bought a property, what's the likelihood that you want to sell the property immediately? Likely for below market. Almost zero, right? And I'm not saying it's impossible to find leads like that. I've actually bought property from people who have purchased it less than a year ago, and those deals have worked out great. But the majority of the deals have come from, in all arenas, whether it's 100 units, whether it's like a 50 or 60 unit apartment complex, whether it's a 5-unit or a condo or a single family flip, most of them have owned the property for 5, 10, 15, 30 years sometimes.